Man, Quincy Jones passed away at 91. Quincy Jones is one of those dudes that you just felt like was going to be around forever. Like, and to be honest, like the first 40 years of my life, he's impacted it in some form, which is crazy. I can't even imagine. If you take Quincy Jones out of my life in some form, it's like, I don't know if I'd be the same guy. Um, the last time I saw him in an interview was in 2023. He was on CBS Sunday Morning, and it was talking about Henry Mancini, and Tracy Smith was interviewing him, and Tracy Smith, you know, attractive blonde lady, and Quincy Jones, she was asking about Henry Mancini, and Quincy Jones was just looking her dead in her eyes. Now Quincy Jones at this point is like 90 years old, all hunched over, and that dude was still flirting hard. It's just like, oh my god, I would be like this dude. When I get old, you can tell that dude he can pull Tracy Smith. That was fun. But yeah, Quincy Jones's life is so crazy. Like, he met Ray Charles when they were teenagers in Seattle. And that was like in the late 40s. And his daughter Khadida was engaged to Tupac when Pac died in 1996. That's 50 years of popular culture in between Ray Charles and Pac. That's crazy. So it's hard. It's hard for me to reduce Quincy Jones's life in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try. And it's still not going to be enough time. So Quincy Jones was born in 1933 in Chicago. Could have been a gangbanger. Was in a gang. His dad allegedly was kind of loosely connected to gangs as well. But his dad moved to Seattle, changed his life around, moved to Seattle. And when Quincy was 12, he learned how to play trumpet. When he was 15, that's when he met Ray Charles. Ray Charles, who lived in Tampa, found his way out to Seattle. And when Ray was 14, that Ray Charles story of how he was able to get around with no help is just amazing as a teen. So they become lifelong friends. Quincy then becomes such a good trumpet player. He goes to New York City, plays with Count Basie, Tommy Dorsey, I think Lionel Hampton. Then he goes to France and studies jazz in France, comes back. Frank Sinatra in the late 50s asked Quincy to put on like a music benefit. They worked together. Then Sinatra, out of the blue, calls Quincy like 6 years later to work on his album with him, with Count Basie. Sinatra and Count Basie were making an album. They asked Quincy to work on it. Quincy put it together. And that's where Frank does Fly Me to the Moon. And Quincy said, my life changed after that. But also in the 60s, Quincy knew that music was changing. Like, Quincy could have very easily stayed in jazz, but Quincy knew that you had to morph and change, which would be his calling card for the rest of his career. He produces It's My Party by Leslie Gore. He produces, creates a soul bossa nova, which would later be used in Austin Powers, one of the greatest films ever. Oh, behave. I love Austin Powers. He creates the theme from Sanford and Son. Then there's that Faithful soundtrack. He works on the Wiz soundtrack, which Michael Jackson plays the Scarecrow. He produces the song You Can't Win for Michael, one of the greatest Michael Jackson songs ever. And then from that, Michael and Quincy do Off the Wall. They make another album. Michael scraps it because it's not good enough. They make Thriller, and then they make Bad. 3 great albums, 3 totally different sounding albums. Just greatness. One of the greatest music artists, producer partnerships ever. But if you go back to that Off the Wall period, there's that 70s period that's not talked about, where Quincy puts out The Dude, the Best Friends album, but he's also working with James Ingram and Patti Austin. Also the Brothers Johnson, where they do Stomp. But with Patti, he does Razzmatazz. With James, he does Just Once. With Patti and James, he does How Do You Stop the Music from Playing, I think. I forget the titles sometimes. Also, Baby Come to Me, which would be the theme song for Luke and Laura when Luke and Laura was hiding on General Hospital. So that 70s period of Quincy sometimes get lost. We move ahead. Him and Michael start working together. He works with Teddy Riley, which was a great move. Michael and Teddy were great on Dangerous. So I understand why Michael made that move, but I think Quincy was hurt by that. And then years down the road, he would talk bad about Mike. But old people talk bad about everybody. So it's not just Quincy. But Quincy does do Back on the Block. Back on the Block introduces us to Tevin Campbell on Tomorrow, where he sounds like a young Michael Jackson. It gives us the Quiet Storm Staples' Secret Garden with Al B. Sure and James Ingram and Barry White and El DeBarge. He has the song Back on the Block with Melly Mel and a host of rappers, but it sounds dated. And I think that's why Michael moved away from Quincy, because Teddy was more connected to hip hop than Quincy was. But in the '90s, Quincy pivots, right? Quincy pivots. He gives us. He's the founder of Vibe magazine, still one of the greatest magazines ever. Like there's hip hop journalists today, and they're okay, but the journalists they had back then for Vibe, fantastic, men and female. We get Kevin Powell, Danielle Smith, I think Bonds Malone, Chio Hardari, just great journalists. Like we get Kevin Powell's interview with Pac when Pac was in prison. We get the cover of TLC on Vibe with Left Eye's wearing the fireman's hat after she accidentally burned down Andre Rison's home. Like the covers were fantastic. You had the Beatles type cover with Pac and Suge and Dre and Snoop. Oh man, Vibe was excellent. I miss Vibe magazine. And then Quincy also he pivots to TV and he gives us the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where Will Smith is the star. Now, the thing about Will Smith was always was entertaining in music videos, but we didn't know if Will could act. He was funny in videos, but we didn't know this dude can act at all. He didn't know he could really act, right? And plus, at that point, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince weren't as popular anymore. I mean, it was doing stuff. They had that song, I Think I Could Beat Mike Tyson. They were far away from he's the DJ, I'm the rapper. So there was a big risk. Now it looks like a genius move, but back then it was a risk for NBC and Quincy to have Will Smith, a non-actor rapper, anchor this show on NBC because it could have been canceled at any time in the beginning, but Will was great. So we get that. And the funny thing about all this stuff is, all this stuff might not have happened back in 1974. 1974, Quincy Jones has a brain aneurysm. So bad he goes into surgery. When he's in surgery, they find another one, an aneurysm that was about to pop, and he could have died. And I think they said he basically was telling his friends and family, you should talk to Quincy because he might not make it. But he survived. The tragedy of that was because Quincy was an excellent trumpet player. He couldn't play trumpet anymore. But that was it. But he survived. So if he would have passed away, we wouldn't have gotten Off the Wall and Thriller and Bad. We wouldn't have got the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. We wouldn't have got Vibe magazine. We probably never would have seen Tevin Campbell and all this stuff. Rashida Jones, maybe she wouldn't have been this actress now because his dad was so intricate in the industry. But yeah, losing a guy like Quincy is crazy. It's crazy. It's because he's always been here. Quincy Jones has been the soundtrack of my life. So do yourself a favor. Pick up, if you can find an autobiography about Quincy Jones, pick that up. Go on YouTube and just type in Quincy Jones 70s, Quincy Jones 60s, Quincy Jones 80s, and hear all the rich music that he produced over the years. Because I think the problem with, like, even with oldies R&B stations, they kind of play a certain number of songs. And so I don't think they go deep into Quincy Jones's repertoire. They might play Baby Come to Me, but they might not play Razzmatazz. So I'm just saying Quincy Jones is just like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are always going to be my favorite producers of all time. But if you ask me, Kev, like, who would you rather have, Quincy Jones at his peak or Jimmy and Terry at their peak? I'm taking Quincy Jones. Not just musically, but all the stories. I mean, this dude, I would love to hear stories about him and a young Ray Charles as teenagers. I would love to hear what it was like to produce Frank Sinatra. I would love to hear what it was like to work with Michael Jackson. That album between Off the Wall and Thriller, where they made a complete album and they didn't put that one out. I would love to hear what it was like. Why did he start Vibe magazine? What it was like being a producer on TV? What it was like trying to recover from 2 brain aneurysms, and how did he feel about his career? I would love to hear, about his friendship with Herbie Hancock and what was Miles Davis was like, and who was Count Basie, what was Tupac like. This guy was great. This guy is great, man. And again, it's still amazing to me. Back when Back on the Block was out, there was a young lady. I was working at the radio station. This young lady said, like, "Oh my God, he's so good looking," and he was like almost 60 years old. It's like he could be your granddaddy. But man, this guy, he was smooth, man. If I was only a 10th as smooth as Quincy Jones, my life would be so much better. So much better. Rest in peace, sir. You are the last of an era, and you'll never be replaced.